You were there. You were breathing, feeling, responding to the world around you. You had a face, and that face expressed hunger and comfort and fear and delight. People held you and spoke to you and sang to you. You learned things: the sound of your mother's voice, the feeling of warmth, the shock of cold air, the difference between the face that always came when you cried and the faces that didn't. You experienced all of it, and you remember none of it. This is one of the strangest facts about being human. Not that babies can't think. They can, in ways that will genuinely surprise you. Not that infants don't feel. They feel intensely, but that all of it, every moment of those first 2 or 3 years of your life, is simply gone, not buried, not locked away somewhere, waiting to be recovered. Gone. Scientists call this infantile amnesia. And the more they study it, the stranger it gets. Here is where it starts to get interesting. You were not cognitively absent during those first years. Your brain was extraordinarily active. From birth, a human infant is processing information at a rate that adult brains cannot match. Developmental psychologist Alison Gopnik at the University of California, Berkeley, has spent decades studying infant cognition, and her conclusion is striking. She argues that babies are not primitive versions of adult minds. They are a completely different kind of mind, one optimized not for focused action, but for wide-open learning. Gopnik describes the baby brain as a lantern rather than a spotlight. An adult mind focuses like a spotlight, narrow, directed, filtering most of the world out to concentrate on the task at hand. A baby's mind illuminates everything at once. Every sensory input, every face, every sound, every texture receives equal weight. This is why babies can learn languages faster than any computer. Why they pick up on statistical patterns in speech before they can speak a single word. Why they understand basic principles of physics, object permanence, gravity, continuity, before they can walk. You were not absent in those early years. You were extraordinarily present. More present, in some ways, than you will ever be again. So why do you remember none of it? The answer involves a structure deep in the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the brain's memory consolidation center. It takes experiences and converts them into long-term memories, the kind that you can consciously recall and narrate. But here is the critical detail. The hippocampus is one of the last brain structures to mature. In the first 2 years of life, the human hippocampus is still forming, still building the neural architecture it needs to do its job. It is like a library that is still being built while the books keep arriving. The books get shelved somewhere, but without the proper organizational system, there is no way to find them. Neuroscientist Paul Frankland at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto has done groundbreaking work on what happens to early memories in the brain. He and his colleagues discovered that infant brains generate new neurons in the hippocampus at an extremely high rate, a process called neurogenesis. This is actually part of the problem. The rapid creation of new neurons disrupts existing memory traces. the very thing that makes the infant brain so powerful at learning its extraordinary plasticity, its ability to grow and rewire at breathtaking speed, is also what erases the memories that learning produced. Think about that for a moment. Your brain was not too immature to form memories. It was forming them constantly. It was then destroying them, rewriting the circuits that stored them, growing so fast that the records of your earliest experiences were overwritten before they could become permanent. You were not too young to remember. You were too busy becoming. But there is another layer to this story, and it involves something that most people never consider when they think about memory: language. Psychologist Robyn Fivush at Emory University has spent years studying the relationship between language and autobiographical memory, the kind of memory that allows you to tell the story of your own life. And her research reveals something that changes everything about how you understand your earliest years. Autobiographical memory is not just about what happened. It is about having a framework for organizing what happened into a narrative, a story, a sequence with a beginning, a middle, and a self at the center of it. And that framework is built from language. Before you had words, you had no way to organize your experiences into a story you could tell yourself or others. You had sensory impressions, emotional states, physical sensations, but you did not have the linguistic structure to turn those experiences into the kind of memory you can consciously retrieve. The moment something happened, it had no label, no slot, no narrative home. It existed as raw experience and then dissolved. This is why your earliest retrievable memories almost always come from around age 2.5 to 3 precisely, the point at which language begins to give you the tools to construct a self that persists through time. You cannot remember your first birthday because the you that would need to remember, it did not yet exist in the form that does the remembering. This idea reaches into deep territory. The self you experience as continuous, the one that wakes up every morning knowing who it is, knowing its history, knowing the story of its own life, that self is a construction. It is built from memory and language working together. Before both of those systems were in place, there was experience, but there was not yet a self to file it under. You existed before you existed as yourself. And there is something else happening in those early years that researchers have only recently begun to map: emotional memory. Even though you cannot consciously recall your early experiences, they are not entirely gone. They left traces not in your narrative memory, but in your body, in your nervous system, in the patterns of your emotional responses, your sense of safety, your capacity for trust and connection. Developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth pioneered research into what she called attachment theory, the way the quality of the bond between infant and caregiver shapes the developing brain in ways that persist throughout life. Infants who experienced consistent, responsive caregiving developed nervous systems calibrated for trust. Their baseline sense of the world is that it is safe, that needs will be met, that other people can be relied upon. Infants who experience inconsistent or frightened caregiving develop nervous systems calibrated for threat, hypervigilant, distrustful, primed to detect danger in situations that others would read as safe. You cannot remember any of this happening, but your body learned it, and it has been running that program ever since. This is what researchers now call implicit memory, the memory that lives not in conscious recollection, but in reflex, in pattern, in the automatic responses you have to situations before your thinking. Mind has had a chance to weigh in. The reason you feel inexplicably safe in certain environments. The reason certain tones of voice immediately put you at ease or on edge. The reason some situations trigger response in your body that seems out of proportion to anything you can consciously explain. Your earliest experiences are not memories. They are instructions. So here is what was actually happening. During those first years that you cannot remember, you were building the operating system that your entire life would run on. You were learning the fundamental rules of your world, whether it was safe or dangerous, whether other people were reliable or unpredictable, whether your needs would be met or ignored. You were learning the sound patterns of your language, the facial expressions of your culture, the emotional rhythms of your family. You were building the neural architecture that would underlie every thought, every relationship, every emotional response you would ever have. You were doing the most important work of your life, and you were doing it without forming a single memory you would ever be able to recall. Tonight, if you are lucky, somewhere a baby is lying awake in the dark, processing the world at a speed and depth that no adult can match, taking in everything, building everything, forgetting everything, not because they are too young to experience, but because they are too busy becoming everything they will ever be. You were there. You just weren't there yet.